Hello there everyone and welcome to Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate for Beginners. My name is David and today we're going to be covering the Sword and Shield. The Sword and Shield is often dismissed by many hunters because it is seen as being the weapon designed around newer players. The weapon that is used at the very beginning of the game when you're just learning the basics, and that something else should be used in its stead as you progress and you feel more confident, often citing the weapon's low damage output as a central reason for this departure. From my own experience, I can tell you that this is simply untrue, and it's because of this thinking that makes the Sword and Shield, in my own opinion, the most undervalued weapon within the entire game. So let's start with the core basics and then I'll go on to explain why the Sword and Shield is actually strong in this game. So everyone should know, if you've used the Sword and Shield, that one of its key benefits, especially for new players, is that the weapon is very simple to use. It is by far one of the easiest weapons to use within the entire game, which makes it a great weapon for new players to pick up and use almost right away. This is because the weapon doesn't have a mechanic that goes along with using it like the longsword and dual sword do in comparison. This means that the Sword and Shield's effectiveness isn't dictated by these additional mechanics. The downside to not having one of these mechanics, however, means that the weapon suffers from having almost no burst potential. As I said, I believe this is because the weapon doesn't have a mechanic like the Spirit Gauge or Demon Mode, which the Longsword and the Dual Swords have respectively. The Sword and Shield's other disadvantages lie within its reach as well as the lack of strength in its guard, but more than makes up for this with its key offensive characteristic: speed. The attack speed of the weapon allows for several consecutive attacks over a very small period of time. This, coupled with the Sword and Shield's lack of commitment for combos, allows the player to break off whenever they need to with little consequence. This leads Sword and Shield users to essentially dance around their target, jumping in whenever they can, doing some damage and then backing off to avoid getting hit themselves. This ultimately results in consistent damage output throughout the course of entire hunts. At first, this may be a bit difficult to reliably perform, but once you've mastered this style of play, you will notice that the weapon has some of the highest damage per second values throughout the entire weapon selection within the game. This is despite its low damage per hit values, which give the illusion that the weapon itself is actually very weak. In contrast, it is very strong. Therefore, the Sword and Shield lends itself well to players who really want to be highly aggressive, or for players who want a faster change of pace while hunting, so that's always good. If you want to be in the action, you want to be in there all of the time, you want to be doing stuff, then I recommend using the Sword and Shield. To recap very briefly on the advantages of the weapon, the first is that it's very simple to use, allowing anyone to pick it up and use it effectively from the get-go, which is very good. But once you learn to use the weapon correctly, get used to the playstyle, you'll be able to perform a consistently high damage output throughout entire hunts. So that's also good. And because the weapon is very mobile, you can get in and out very quickly, as I've mentioned. The weapon is also a cutting weapon, so you can cut off tails if you can reach them, but I'll get to that in a minute. The weapon set allows the hunter to use items while the weapon is unsheathed, which is very nice if you want to put traps down or you want to drink a potion, anything like that. So that's always good, and it gives weight to the argument that the weapon can be used supportively, so there's also that. The last one is that the weapon is very good for causing status effects because of the very quick attack speed. Now for the negatives, there aren't really that many, but they're all important to note, so in order to keep this in mind. First and arguably most important is that the weapon has very limited reach. So earlier I said that if you can hit a tail, you can cut it off. Chances are you're not going to be designated tail cutter, so if you want to be cutting tails or hitting flying wyverns, you know, that fly low like Barrioff does it, Rathlos does it. If you want to be doing that, I'd recommend picking a longer weapon such as the longsword or greatsword, something like that. The weapon's guard is very weak. I personally do not even consider using the guard unless I really need to. There's no way of me getting out of the way of that attack and I cannot evade through it. But most of the time I don't even consider the weapon using the guard just because it's that weak. So there's that to take into consideration. And finally, there is no burst potential with the weapon, as I've said. So if you're looking for a weapon where you need on-demand burst, then I recommend picking either the dual swords, the long sword, the hammer, great sword, gun lance, you know, basically something that's not the Sword and Shield, because it relies heavily on consistent damage output. The skills that you pick will likely depend on how you wish to use the weapon, usually centering around either pure damage output, status affliction, or item use. Regardless of which one you pick, I recommend picking up Evasion +1 at least, just because it's going to help you constantly when you need to go in, attack, and then get out safely. As for everything else, you really cannot go wrong with either Razor Sharp or Sharpness +1, even Speed Sharpening, whichever gives you the most benefit to enhance your sharpness. It's always good to throw that in. Element attack +1 and attack oblige go without saying, those are your purely offensive skills. You can get either of those in. Status only applies if you're focusing on status application. Finally, we have the item use abilities. So Trapmaster is good if you're going to be putting down a lot of bombs, a lot of traps, very good. Bombardier is going to be good if you're going to utilize a lot of bombs in game, or if you're using a slime sword and shield, one of the two. Wide range is also good if you wish to share your item use with the rest of your party online. Conversely, you could just use life powders instead, but I'll leave that up to you to decide, so pick whichever you want. And finally, we have speed eating, which is very nice because we have that mechanic of being able to use items whenever we want when the weapon's unsheathed, so any consumable in the game, you can seemingly just gobble it down very quickly. That about wraps it up for the Sword and Shield, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section, ask me a question, anything like that. But that's about it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, have a great day, and thank you for watching. So yeah.